Tonight it'll remain rather cloudy and persistent rain will affect parts of Lincolnshire and East Anglia. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, it's just gone 6 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to get you up to date on GB News. Celebration for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee have been rounded off with a special appearance on Buckingham Palace's balcony. Her Majesty The Queen greeted the crowds in London with other senior members of the royal family for the national anthem. Today's festivities involved a 2-mile-long carnival procession, which started at Horse Guards Parade and ended outside the palace. Some 10,000 people were involved, as well as the Gold State coach, which carried the Queen to her coronation. Meanwhile, millions have gathered for street parties across the country, with more than 85,000 big Jubilee lunches being held. Celebrations involved food, bunting and dancing in thousands of locations across the country. This was in Castle Donington in Leicestershire, just one of many across the country today. Cardiff residents have had the chance to try out some cakes baked by the Duchess of Cambridge and her 3 children. Pictures posted on William and Kate's official Twitter account show Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis baking cupcakes, which have been handed out at street parties in the city today. In other news, a man has died after falling into the River Thames when police tried to detain him with the use of a taser. Officers were called yesterday to Chelsea Bridge Road after reports of a man shouting in the street with a screwdriver. The man in his 40s was rescued by the local lifeboat and taken to a hospital in critical condition, but he later died. The police watchdog says an investigation is underway. And travellers in London have been advised to avoid the tube network tomorrow due to a strike by thousands of workers. Members of the RMT union will walk out for 24 hours in a dispute over jobs and pensions starting from 8 a.m. tomorrow. Transport for London has warned of severe disruption on the underground network, but says that some train services will continue to run. President Vladimir Putin is warning the US against supplying long-range missiles to Ukraine, threatening to strike new targets if they do. It follows Washington announcing plans to send advanced rocket systems to Ukraine after they vowed not to target Russian territory. Meanwhile, the Kremlin claims to have destroyed tanks provided to Ukraine by European countries. Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, was rocked by several explosions overnight. And Ukraine's football team began their match against Wales draped in their country's flag. The World Cup playoff is underway in Cardiff, with the score currently at 1-0 to Wales. The winner of the match will take the final spot in the competition in Qatar later this year. On TV, online, in DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. We'll have more news as it happens, but for now, it's a special Platinum Jubilee programme with Alistair Stewart.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy for many, with outbreaks of thundery rain possible for some. Let's take a look at the details. In the southwest of England, a band of heavy and possibly thundery rain will affect the parts of North Devon and Somerset, much clearer and drier further west. In the southeast of England, it'll remain rather overcast this evening, and some heavy, possibly thundery showers may affect western areas for a time. In South Wales, there's a thunderstorm warning in force this evening, so there could be some spray on the roads and sudden downpours. In the Midlands, it'll be a murky evening, drizzly for some, but across more southern areas, there's a risk of some heavy or thundery showers later on. Further north, in northeast England, there'll be a lot of cloud around this evening, especially over any hills, where it's likely to be a little damp, and some may catch a shower elsewhere. For southern Scotland, it'll remain dry for the evening, though it'll be a bit cloudier than the rest of the day. Best chance of sunshine is in more northern areas. In Northern Ireland, it'll be a bit mixed. Eastern areas will start to see the rain and cloud arrive, whereas western areas will hold on to the fine weather. Through the rest of the night, it'll remain rather cloudy, and persistent rain will affect parts of Lincolnshire and East Anglia. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for watching and listening to Elizabeth II, Our Greatest Queen, with me, Alistair Stewart. In 1588, ahead of the Armada, the threatened Spanish invasion, Queen Elizabeth I told her troops at Tilbury, "I now have the body but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too." On her 21st birthday, on the 21st of April 1947, Princess Elizabeth said in Cape Town,
"I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong."
A little more than 5 years later, she became Queen after the death of her beloved father, George VI. And 15 months later, on the 2nd of June 1953, she was crowned Queen Elizabeth II, the very date that we've been celebrating with this Platinum Jubilee. In the wake of the Second World War, austerity and rationing, many talked and hoped for a new Elizabethan age, a global reach and economic prosperity. But none could have predicted what was just how long this second Elizabeth would dominate the nation's affairs, fully 70 years, or how much she'd become a global icon. Her personal passions, from stamp collecting to all manner of equestrianism, are rich and varied. But what of the influence that she had? What of the crises she lived through, personal and national? And how big a personal stamp has she put on it all? Given that Elizabeth I and even Victoria, this has been a remarkable queen. Has she, however, beaten the rest of them to become our greatest? Joining me to discuss that, I'm delighted to be joined by historian, writer and broadcaster David Starkey, cultural historian Dr. Philip Kisley, and royal expert, biographer and editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward. Welcome to all of you. Let's start with that clip that reminded us of what I think is one of her most remarkable speeches, and that is the evolution of empire to Commonwealth, which has been such an important part of her whole life. How did she handle that evolution? Did she have any say in the matter, David?
I don't think she had any say over the, as it were, devolution of the British Empire. In fact, what we've got to remember is the British Empire is unique in so many ways. The British Empire wills its own end. This is the key thing to understand. After the revolt of the American colonies, they decide, with the Durham Report in Canada, that each one of the great, admittedly, white colonies will become self-governing and then independent, and it's all ratified within the Queen's lifetime, admittedly, by the Statute of Westminster in 1831.
Yeah.
So that process was going to continue. She is not Empress of India. Her father had been Emperor of India, her mother had been Empress of India, but that title goes with Indian independence and the Declaration of the Republic pretty well immediately after the Second World War. So she already comes to the throne. She talks of empire. Princess Margaret, again, when there's a whole question over her marriage, says, I'm going to give up the chap I want, Townsend, for the sake of the empire. But the shift was underway. She couldn't have stopped it. What she did, of course, was to smooth it.
Yeah, precisely. Let me bring Ingrid in at that point.
So many ways.
Strikes me about it is that it remained at her pounding heart, and she loved going throughout the Commonwealth that had been empire whenever she could. Places like Canada were particularly important. And she was the glue. She was the glue in a changing institution.
She was the unchanging in a great changing world and a great changing institution. And Prince Philip always used to say, well, the Commonwealth is Lilibet's baby. And she really considered it was her baby. And she brought it forward into the modern world so that it was a Commonwealth of nations. It was a family. She calls it really more her family than the Commonwealth. And people belong to it as like a membership of a club that's going to help you.
And I think there's something else there as well. We're in 2022. We don't think about empire, or generally people don't think about.
Oh, the enemies of empire do. They go on about it. The enemies of Britain go on about it the whole of the time.
Those of you joining us on radio, that is David Starkey joining in. But let's go back to Philip Kisley.
David's absolutely right. Of course, of course they do.
As always.
Of course they do. But what we don't appreciate, is this huge melancholy after the war that stretches right into the 1970s.
A war in which Commonwealth soldiers played an absolutely
Philip, I'm
part.
sorry. I think I was alive, and I think you're wrong. The reign begins with this tremendous burst of hope. Remember, Britain of the 1950s is pioneering jet travel, pioneering atomic power, pioneering fusion. There's this extraordinary failure. The sense of regret, the sense of something's gone horribly wrong, is actually the beginning of the 60s. Her reign begins...
Hang on, David.
This is why we talk about the new eras of
I want to come on to
age.
technology a little bit later on. I want to finish this thought, because to me it's a profound one, Philip.
I think
this could have gone very badly wrong had she not gone along with it, become the glue, Lilibet's baby, as Ingrid reminded us.
So that's how we understand the importance of the Commonwealth, I think, because it's that segue from empire into the new era. I think David's right. There was an absolute forward thrust of absolute newness, and you can see that right from 1945 onwards. But also, I would argue at this time there is also, and it increases and increases and increases, and it kind of builds. Curiously enough, in the 70s, there is this melancholia there. There is this. It's
called Suez. It's Suez.
It's called Suez.
It's called Suez. But remember, you've got 4 years before Suez, and it's really important we understand that sense of optimism. But there's another thing again, because we're trying to arrive at a judgment, Alistair. And I think it's really important we balance the Commonwealth, which has been the Queen's baby. It's the only area where she operates totally independently of ministerial advice. Now, this is going to bite them. And it is manifestly doing so if you look at the problems of the recent tours of the West Indies. It may very well be that Charles would be sensible. It's already been suggested by quite a few commentators. If Charles said, actually, I know the Queen wanted me to be head of the Commonwealth, would you please vote?
Yeah.
Maybe as a Briton, I should step back, because otherwise the whole problem of race relations, of reparations for slavery, and the complete misunderstanding of the role of the royal family as somehow representing Britain. The reason they're in all of these places is because they're either the head of state of the Barbados or wherever it be.
They represent the actual places. That's the
right.
point.
That's right.
Let's take that point then to segue on, and I'm going to start on this one with Ingrid, if I may. David said something very important then, and that is that within the Commonwealth, she can do her own thing. Not so within the United Kingdom. In her reign, she has seen devolution. She has seen calls for independence in Scotland. We'll come to Ireland in some considerable detail in just a moment. But there, it seems to me, on 2 occasions, she got as close to breaking the rules, if not actually breaking the rules, when she said quietly to a parishioner at the little church outside Balmoral, well, I do hope people think terribly carefully before they vote. And then Cameron lets it out of the bag that when he told her the result of that independence referendum, she purred with glee. Is that because it mattered to her so much, or did she just forget the rules of engagement, Ingrid?
I think it mattered to her so much. She is Queen of the United Kingdom. The idea of Scotland moving out of the United Kingdom was abhorrent to her. It really was. And so I think she cared hugely, but she had to bite her lip. And I think, you know, she's very canny. She knows exactly what she's saying. Yeah. And it was just a little softener. It was nothing
Did she
more
know,
than that.
Philip, exactly what she was doing, or is that one of your areas of expertise? That was a trick of the cameras being too close, or social media, or what have you?
No, I think she knew what she was doing. I mean, anyone who's been to Balmoral will feel that connection between, you know, Scotland and England is so important to her. And I first time I went to Balmoral, I was so high waiting outside for her to.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you'd been invited in.
No. But I was waiting outside. But the union is incredibly important.
But it's a foundation.
Yeah.
And you know, we were talking about events at St Paul's Cathedral. The biggest event of the 18th century was when Queen Anne, in 1707, went to St Paul's to celebrate the Act of Union. But it's been in dispute. It was in dispute from the very beginning of her reign. Don't you remember? There was actually a dispute about the fact that she was Queen Elizabeth II of England, but only Queen Elizabeth I of Scotland. And the Scot Nats, even then, who in those days had really quite unpleasant far-right associations, you know, had been heavily involved in pro-German activity, I think there were actual bombs. I mean, there was a tremendous protest, I remember, over letterboxes, you know, that have the E2 on them. So she has had these problems forever. It's one of the reasons why she handles them so deftly. We tend to think, they're just today's problems. Yeah. They're not. These are continuing issues, but of course they become acutely exacerbated, above all, by the disappearance, until recently, of Tory Scotland. Yes. The impact of Thatcherism, and I don't know. There's lots of rumours about the tensions between those two. But the destruction of Scottish industry, the ending of the vast importance of shipbuilding in Glasgow, that leads to utterly fundamental political imbalances between the two
Fascinating 5 or 6 minutes by way of starter. And we talked about Empire, Commonwealth, we talked about the Union, the United Kingdom. Let me end with Europe, because that's been profound as well. Post-war Europe developed economically through an iron and steel trades federation into the European Economic Community and now the European Union, which we have voted to leave. At its pounding heart has been the desire to be something approaching a nation-state, an ever closer union of peoples. And also, as those in favour of leaving made crystal clear, it was the incursion upon our rights and our ability to pass our own laws, which always end, as David and I were talking about yesterday, with La Reine le Veut. Was she worried about the evolution of Europe? Ingrid Stewart?
I think we will never really know what she thought about Europe. But I feel that she was probably thought we would be better to stay in Europe because she was brought up in the war as a child. She spent at Windsor Castle, and I think that it's always this reparation and friendship and forgiveness. And I just sneakingly feel I could be completely wrong, and David will tell me I am.
No.
But I think the Queen would not have been pro-Brexit.
I think that's quite likely. But what we've got to remember again, Alistair, from the very moment of its conception, you were talking about the Coal and Steel Federation, the great speech which announces it, the Declaration of 1950, Britain was deliberately excluded. And again, we're deliberately excluded by de Gaulle. One of the great dramatic moments is the first attempt at British entry to the European Union. And you can now see de Gaulle presciently says, Britain's different. It looks to the sea. It looks internationally. It looks to America, Australia, whatever. Because, of course, this is the paradox about the Queen. The Commonwealth that she loves is that ghost of the empire.
Yes.
It's that Britain that isn't a European... What de Gaulle says quite correctly, Britain is only half a European power.
Does her background of having German blood, German family connections, and the fact that she was married for so long to someone who was part Greek...
It must do.
And German.
It must do.
And essentially German.
Philip Kisley?
I mean, it must do, but I think there's a slightly broader point that we can think about, and it's what really shapes her, I think, as a person and shapes her psyche, and that's the Second World War and the aftermath of the Second World War. And I think the idea of Europe is nation-states are dangerous in Europe. Everywhere else in the world, they ensure peace, but at that particular time, they are dangerous.
Really?
They're seen to be dangerous.
Really?
And I think that's probably something, I'm just thinking what you're thinking about there, that's probably something that really does play into what she feels.
Final quick thought, and then we're going to hear from one of our viewers, I'm delighted to say. We'll take a break and then we'll come back. There's masses more to talk about. But I mentioned almost in passing, Ingrid, the late Duke. Forget nationality just for a moment, but as she famously said, he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. On these great constitutional and political matters, was he also her confidant?
I don't think he was. He helped her, and he would proffer advice if asked, but he was very, very careful to state. He never, for instance, looked at the state papers, because he felt he was freer to have his own opinions without ever having read them. And he kind of stepped back because he was very much his own person and wanted to have his own opinions, which we know he did, and some of them were very strong. So I don't think he did get involved.
Only in the Christmas broadcasts. We know they are jointly written.
Oh, yes, he used to help her write.
In a very, very important way. And again, just going right back to the beginning, the new Elizabethan age. One of my favourite quotes from the Christmas broadcast is when everybody's going on about this new Elizabethan age, what does Queen Elizabeth II say? I do not much like Queen Elizabeth I. She never went abroad, she had no children, and she was an absolute ruler, and I am completely different.
Final thought to you, Philip Kisley. Someone said to me the other day, never ever forget, Elizabeth II was a supreme feminist in her own way, not least in the relationship with her husband.
I just think about how she was formed, and I do think about that particular moment. And we've talked about empire, we've talked about the Commonwealth, we've talked about her relationship with her husband, which is complex, I think, and I think it's a close relationship. And I think she's just such a fascinating figure.
You, our lovely viewers and listeners, have been sending in your memories of the Queen to Jubilee at gbnews.uk. Roger from the Isle of Man says, the Queen was visiting the Isle of Man when I was a child. There is a legend that when a reigning monarch visits, a mist descends to protect us from the Vikings. It was a sunny day, but an hour before Her Majesty arrived, a thick mist descended, and an hour after she departed, the mist lifted. Almost poetic. All my guests are smiling. I love that one. Thank you so much for all of those. We'll be having lots more before we finish at 7 o'clock. It's 23.5 minutes past 6. After the break, we'll be discussing how Her Majesty has adapted to modern times and her relationships with the 14 Prime Ministers who have served her. See you after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, and thank you for watching and listening to Elizabeth II, our greatest queen, with me, Alastair Stewart, and I'm delighted still to be joined by writer and broadcaster David Starkey, cultural historian Dr. Philip Kisley, and royal expert biographer and editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward. We'll be getting back to them in just a moment, but I've invited one of our viewers who got in touch to actually join us because we all of us love what I think he's about to tell you all about. His name is Jim Ryder, and Jim's a former director of music on the Royal Yacht Britannia. He had the privilege of working with Her Majesty the Queen, and he joins me now. There you are. What a fantastic job. And I know that both the Band of the Royal Marines on the dockside, and I've seen them perform when I covered a state visit up in Iceland, but also the musicians on board are crucial to how that lovely yacht, which she herself launched, functioned and what it meant to her. What's your top and happiest memory?
Oh, well, gracious me, what a wonderful experience I had, and what a privilege it was to serve the Queen and indeed the country. And you just get on with your job. I wasn't having to do anything I didn't know how to do, so I was able to do that. Gave me great pleasure. I've got a number of wonderful stories, but mainly I was just delighted to work with the Queen. Something that's come up today that somebody reminded me of was that I was once not hauled over the coals, but I did have a word, you get a quiet word down from Her Majesty through the secretary and things. And it was that she didn't like the hymns to be played too slowly. She wanted them done quickly. So when I was conducting the orchestra that we had on board, I would, of course, do the normal thing for that hymn. And I was doing what I thought was the usual way to do it at a reasonable speed. But then the Queen likes the hymns to be done quite quickly. And I can imagine the anxiety that she would have been having to sit through this great service that has gone on today. And one of the things she won't like doing is sitting there with the hymns being done very, very slowly and choirs singing along. She appreciates music, of course she does. But, she doesn't like to be held around, and she wanted the hymns done fairly quickly on the church service that we would have on a Sunday morning when we were at sea and the Queen was on board. She wanted to get on with it because she wanted to get on to coffee or lunch or a meeting or whatever she wanted to do. So
Jim, worth every moment of that. And I can tell you, thank you so much for joining us, that two great historians and one of the all-time experts on the royal family were sitting here, jaw dropped, not knowing that anecdote and thoroughly enjoying it. God bless you and thank you very much indeed. We didn't know that. She likes her hymns to be speedy.
It's exactly like Victoria. God's got his place, but remember, she is head of the church, or at least she's the supreme governor. There's a sort of equality there.
And what a fantastic job as well, eh? I want that job.
Yeah, and the segue, forgive me for this, because it's a little bit contrived, and it only struck me when we listened there, all four of us, I should say, to Jim's anecdote, is there is talk about the possibility of a replacement being commissioned for Britannia, because she is now laid up in Scotland, which takes me to new technology. Goodness knows what it would be if they did commission one. I said at the very beginning that the range of technological advance that has happened over the last 70 years makes the Industrial Revolution almost like a kind of a dress rehearsal for it. And I think you mentioned nuclear power and fission getting underway. She inaugurated the first nuclear power station in this country. Victoria adopted trains and phones. But Elizabeth is engaged with the internet, with Twitter, with Zoom. A woman, 60, now in her 90s, has taken it all on board, Philip Kisley, and embraced it.
This is the genius of her in a way, isn't it? That she takes on change and she embraces it, as you say, but she stays the same, and she manages to do those two things in a way that is very comforting to people. I'm just thinking about technology, and for me, the most important thing I think is television. From the early 50s, and everybody seeing that. And that. For the first time, you've got these people in your front room. It is
the coronation.
It's the coronation. The coronation in your front room. It's amazing.
The coronation is the key. I was there. I was watching it as an 8-year-old boy. I'd never seen television. I barely glimpsed London. And suddenly, that world was there. But equally remember, and we've got to be honest, we're trying to assess her and assess the reign. The reign is a reign of fundamental failure on the part of Britain. That Britain of the 1950s was the leading technological power along with the United States. We have constantly been brilliant innovation. Trinity College, Cambridge has got more Nobel Prizes than the whole of France. We've consistently failed to develop it. And this is the great contrast with the 19th century, when, of course, Britain triumphed technologically, and it's the great contrast, dare I say, with the first Elizabeth.
Well, let me bring Ingrid in at that point as well, because although you're literally an expert on this...
I'm not an expert on technology.
No, but I'll tell you what you are an expert on, and that's why you'll understand my next question specifically to you rather than to Philip or to David. And it is that duality. I once did an awards ceremony with the Duke of Edinburgh, and it was the Royal Engineering Society, and it was the boss of McLaren Formula One got the gong. And he said to me privately afterwards, he said, that guy knows everything. He knows everything about engineering and technology. Albert was the driving force in Victoria's era and saying we must embrace all of this stuff and we must have the great exhibition and what have you. This is a relationship where the Queen may have wanted things to happen or may not have wanted them to happen. But it was the Duke who wanted the coronation televised.
Oh, absolutely it was. And he became chairman of the Coronation Committee because the Queen...
It's another amazing echo of Albert.
Yes. And she knew she had to give him something to do. And he was brilliant. And he had this mind for detail. And he never forgot anything. So he was the perfect person to chair that.
And there were the Queen's Awards to industry. But it never quite worked. And I think we need, because we're trying to do a big historical assessment, I think we need to be honest about this.
Why didn't the awards to industry work?
Well, of course, we've got too many awards.
OK. Let me chip in and both of you comment on it. So you finish and then Philip come in on it as well. Because I'm also involved. Another thing is the Queen's Anniversary Awards to Higher and Further Education. And Now it's Prince Charles who takes an interest. But in the early days, the guys and gals who run it told me she was genuinely interested. And she was partly involved in saying not just the great universities, the Cambridges and the Oxfords and the rest of it. There are other institutions out there, and that's why it became HE and FE.
But equally, there's a great problem. The Queen herself, again, we're trying to assess. Yeah. Compare with Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I has 4 or 5 languages. The Queen has got English and French. The Queen's education is profoundly limited. Elizabeth I is one of the great minds of the 16th century. Victoria corresponds with her husband in German. They are European figures. Elizabeth I is the age of Shakespeare. Now, can we begin? J.K. Rowling and Shakespeare don't exactly compare very easily. And Britain is... I was singing its praises yesterday. But can we equally be aware this has been an age of decline?
I think, Philip Kisley, if I can bring you in on that point.
Can I interrupt and say it?
Let me have Philip first and then you, Ingrid. Yeah. For the simple reason that David is saying about failure and what have you. But culturally...
I was going to say, David's talking about a broader culture.
She can't do much about that going on around her.
Oh, I disagree.
David, Philip, okay. But she has embraced stuff which my children use, and like Zoom and like Twitter and stuff. She didn't have to.
No, I mean, on one level, it's a great leveller, and the culture after the war and into the 50s and into the 60s is primarily the energy in the culture and the intellectual energy comes from the left, and it's radical left. It's Marxism. It's people like E.P. Thompson and Raymond Williams and all of those people. This is very, it's against everything she stands for, and in lots of ways it's against Britishness. So I would argue, and David will probably disagree with this, but I would argue that she's really pushing against a very, very overwhelming tide there at that particular point.
But she has never sponsored
David,
culture.
I promised Ingrid.
Never sponsored culture.
I want to ask David something, actually.
Culture, yeah.
David, why do you think that we have declined in this way?
Well, I mean, look at what we were in 1945. We were one of the 2 dominant powers of the world. There's been a shrinkage. Again, what we've all been talking about, she's been this marvellous kind of emollient that in one sense has disguised this fact hers. She is there, she came to the throne, as I said, not as Empress of India, but virtually Empress of everything else.
OK, I'm going to change it on to the next subject I wanted to talk about, but only because it genuinely flows from what the three of you were just talking about, but it's one of those fortuitous things, that in the sense of the Prime Ministers that she served and worked with her. A phenomenal number and a range of them, and one of the standout points I think I mentioned to you, Philip, earlier, was when you look at the white heat of technological revolution. That was a Wilsonian thing, and the creation of polytechnics and so on. Others have been less so. Macmillan was not a technologist, but recognised,
to put it mildly.
But he created the premium bond, and which was a brilliant precursor of the national lottery and all the rest of it. Did she? Let's start with Philip on this one. Did she always maintain that distance, that appropriate constitutional distance with her prime ministers, or bluntly, were there some that she really quite liked and some that she didn't frankly take to?
Well, in terms of detail, the answer is I don't know, but I would suggest that you've just talked about Harold Wilson, and I think she was very close to Harold Wilson. She was also close to John Major as well, particularly so, wasn't she? So that's a kind of interesting dynamic.
John said to me that Major and Callaghan were the 2 most unlikely that she liked a lot.
I didn't... Callaghan in particular, yeah.
But Stoker.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, John Major, coming from a music hall tradition, his father was a music hall comedian, so there's... my guess is she would be very interested in that, because she's very interested in culture, and very interested in British culture. The Wilson connection is really interesting at that point, because the Wilson government pushes through. It's not just technological change, which is a driver. It's massive cultural change. It's the swinging 60s, and the government's very absolutely front and centre of making that happen.
And she didn't, Ingrid, have the... I'm going to stick my neck out here because I'm a huge admirer, but she didn't have the joy of Clement Attlee, an intellectual and political giant, in my humble opinion. Harold was her first Labour Prime Minister. And Harold was a totally different kettle of fish.
I think she liked him because he was very straight and honest, and he didn't pander to her. One she really didn't like was Tony Blair. I do know that, because he was so supercilious and he irritated her.
Well, he publicly patronised.
Yes.
I mean, his behaviour over Diana's death.
I was going to say, he also publicly told her what to do over Diana.
Yes, I mean, and again, you know, the essential point is there is this extraordinary formal deference. We've got what we should really be recognising. We have two monarchs in Britain. We have the Prime Minister, and we have the real monarch. And it's a bit like Japan. Japan had two monarchs. You had the Mikado down in Kyoto, and you had the Shogun up in Tokyo. One exercising real power, the other symbolic power. You see, we're again trying to assess the Queen in broad perspective. Why you cannot compare her with Elizabeth I, and it's even quite difficult to compare her with Victoria. Elizabeth I was the ruler. She had great ministers like William Cecil, with whom she had close and intimate relations, but finally she took the decision. The Queen does not, cannot, will not, and when she had an opportunity to, consistently has declined to do so. She had that one moment when, because of the oddity of the Tory party in those days, she effectively chose both the Prime Minister and the leader of the Tory party when she was persuaded to replace Macmillan with Douglas Hume.
Yes.
She has never, ever let herself be put in that position.
We've got 1 minute left before we take another break and hear from some more of our viewers. You've stuck your neck out on saying that she liked Major. Go on, resolve the Thatcher issue for us.
Well, no, just let me say, Major is the only Prime Minister, I believe...
Thatcher denies there was any tension between them.
No, Major is the only Prime Minister to be invited to Balmoral.
Can I just pause for a moment? Well, those of you who are listening to this conversation on radio, we are now showing a most amazing picture, in my view, which goes left to right. Thatcher, Wilson, Major, Her Majesty, Ted Heath and Jim Callaghan. Incredible. Sorry, I interrupted you, Ingrid.
Major's the only Prime Minister that is invited to Balmoral with his wife, Norma, since he's no longer in the position. And he goes up there fairly regularly, which is most unusual.
Yeah. But are you all saying pass on Margaret Thatcher?
I'm not sure, because I've read both.
You've said we don't know.
I think we can guess. Shall we be as...
I invite these people...
Shall we be as
discreet
as the Queen and say, you can judge for yourself?
Yes. And defend the magic, which I will come to in a moment. Again, thank you so much for those thoughts there on technology and indeed on Prime Ministers. Now, you've been sending in more of your memories of the Queen to Jubilee at gbnews.uk. And here's Barbara, I think it is, I hope I've got that right, whose dress was made from red, white and blue crepe paper, and the crown was made from a cornflakes packet. She is a little girl holding her dad's hand there, right in the middle, and that's a magnificent crown. Lastly, Emily's grandfather on the day of the coronation. Look at that picture and enjoy it. Thank you all so much, and we'll have a few more just before we go off air at about 7 o'clock. Coming up, we'll be speaking about the Queen's children and their children, their troubles, and how the Queen has always managed to rise above it. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back to Elizabeth II, our greatest queen, question mark, with me, Alastair Stewart, and the great broadcaster and historian David Starkey, the great cultural historian and broadcaster Philip Kisley, and royal expert biographer and editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, herself a great broadcaster, Ingrid Seward. Joining us also, in addition to that stellar lineup, is Tony Curran, who met Queen Elizabeth in 1977 when she visited Balmoral Castle. He had the privilege of dancing with Her Majesty that very evening, and he joins me live. That is one singular claim to fame. Tell me about it, Tony.
Well, I'll have to give you a bit of a background first, Alistair. The royal family, when they go to Balmoral, obviously go there, let their hair down, relax, get away from the hustle and bustle of royal life in London and whatever. So they got to Balmoral for about 3 months every year. And there's a regiment always selected to provide the honour guard for her arrival. That's the original picture that appeared in the Dundee Courier. I'm the one second from the left, and that was on the day of her arrival. You then get used as sort of unpaid labour, shall we say, for want of a better expression. And you go on the hill with the Duke, Prince Charles. I was on the hill with him. And like I say, I was fortunate enough to be selected to appear at what's called the Gillies Ball, which is the royal family way of thanking the soldiers for providing the service of being on the hill with the ponies, dragging the deer down to the place where they get sort of skinned and put in the boiling water, and you get a nice stag's head with no skin. And I don't know how much people know about Highland dancing, but it's a Highland ball. The soldiers are all dressed in their finery, green jackets, kilts, tartan socks. A throwback to maybe the Duke of Hamilton's ball before the Battle of Waterloo.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. Tony, just quickly, what actual piece did you dance? Or you performed sword dance in front of her, or did you actually dance with her?
No, it was a bit more intimate than that. The first dance in the evening is what they call a grand march in Eightsome Reel, where you start off as a couple. You march up the hall, you come round and then meet the next two people, that forms four. The four go up, meet the next four, and that's what's called the set for the Eightsome Reel. So once that finished, you obviously danced with Charles, Prince Philip, and a couple of other members of the royal family. And the second dance was called a Paul Jones, which all the ladies form a circle, and all the gentlemen form a circle on the outside. And when the music stops, you dance with the person who's in front of you. Now, before we attended the Gillies Ball, we had to do a lot of practicing of the different dances and whatever, and we were told no one's allowed to dance with the Queen, except the Guard Commander, who was a Major, and the Guard Sergeant Major, who was obviously a Sergeant Major. So the music stops. I had the Duke of Edinburgh on my right-hand side, Prince Charles on my left-hand side, and the Queen was sort of halfway between Prince Charles and me. And as a good soldier, I was told, you don't dance with the Queen. So I stood ramrod at attention, and the next thing you know, I saw everyone else starting dancing. The Queen just leaned over, said good evening, and she must have grabbed me because I didn't move. And the next thing you know, that was us off for 3.5 minutes doing a slow waltz.
Star, Tony, and I'm so grateful that you found time to share that utterly brilliant, historic anecdote with us. You take care and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you.
Just before you go, the part in my email I said there was an amusing story. The amusing part is she apparently writes little notes in a book that's held at Balmoral. And the morning after that particular Gillies Ball, she wrote, "I thoroughly enjoyed my dance with the tall, thin soldier." I'm not thin now, but
You're a star. You're a total star, and I love it. And thanks for finding time for the wee anecdote there at the very end as well. You're going to come on to some more serious stuff, but you were chortling, grinning, smiling. I mean, that is, in a curious, gentle, cultural way, what it's all about, Ingrid.
Well, the Queen...
Made his day, has made his life.
Yes. Well, she knows that most of the people she meets or talk to are never going to talk to her again or meet her again. And she knows she's a people person.
Yeah.
She's very shy.
Yeah.
But she's made herself a people person, and she knows that she has to be seen, which I think is probably very upsetting for her right now.
Well, we'll come to, funnily enough, that's exactly where we're going next. But just very quickly, Philip, but also his lovely anecdote is culturally conservative, an expression that you used yourself earlier. All of those dances, the regalia, rather like Four Weddings and a Funeral, it's Brigadoon! That is Balmoral.
Yeah, it's so sensitive to the context and the place and the people.
And invented by Victoria.
And invented by Victoria, but there's just something so wonderful about her. That shyness as well is something that I think people pick up on.
Yes.
And it's something that people like.
And briefly and singularly, we didn't have time. I was going to talk about the military dimension before the break, but I made a decision that we'd run out of time. But actually, he encompassed that as well, the relationship between her armed services and she, the monarch.
That personal oath, as we heard this morning, again, a soldier saying, when the soldiers who just made the recording, saying, we swore an oath of allegiance. They used that formal term, that intensely personal bond.
It's 10 minutes to 7, so we've got about 8 minutes left. So I'm going to cut all of the rest of these notes that are here, and I'm going to cut to the chase. I've got 2 final questions. The first is this. Things are difficult at the moment with Harry and with Prince Andrew, but compared to Annus Horribilis, it is as nothing. Discuss. Ingrid Seward.
I think Annus Horribilis was particularly bad because it was the breakdown of her own children's marriages. And there she is, she's head of the church, she's defender of the faith. And suddenly, 3 out of her 4 children are getting divorced. I mean, Princess Royal was the first, and then there was Andrew and Fergie, then there was, disaster. Charles and Diana. I mean, she persuaded them. She said to them, can't you just wait? Can't you just try? I mean, but that they couldn't and they wouldn't.
Sure.
And that was really the single biggest disaster. I think I've discussed this with David, actually.
Well, I'm going to bring him in last, because just going via Philip Kisley, if I may. Ingrid's absolutely on the money there, because also in terms of Annus Horribilis, we were talking about the heir to the throne, whereas whatever difficulties Andrew and Harry may be in, they are spares, as it were, and long since gone as spares even, because we now have 4 generations of succession.
Yeah, I think there's a different way to look at Harry in particular, and that's, I would imagine there are families up and down the country with people in them who are Harry's age with a similar kind of educational background to Harry, and they will all be the same thing. It's called identity politics. It's called wokeness. We're all wrestling with it. In 10 years' time, he'll grow up.
And we're watching pictures, for those who are listening to our conversation, David Starkey, on radio, of Harry and Meghan arriving at St Paul's this morning. They wouldn't be there. They wouldn't have been in the Major General's office yesterday at Trooping the Colour had it not been with her approval. They're on their way back in?
I think she desperately wants. She's already made perfectly clear how much she regretted what happened. She is, after all, a grandmother, a mother, great-grandmother, and she likes her family. She wants to see her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. You see, it's a big question here. The royal family has assumed a quite unusual role in the 20th century. The monarchy was reinvented by her grandfather in 1917. The monarchy of Victoria was a German dynasty. It was a grand European dynasty. In 1917, her grandfather deliberately reinvents it as a British family, because you can for the first time, you can marry English men and English women, but also it was, and this is the danger, it was then sold as the perfect family.
Final point on this one to you, Ingrid.
Just 1 second. Yeah,
very brief.
But sorry, and it worked for a long period of time. Yeah. But then, of course, it exposed them to reality.
Yes.
As the great British family, not only theirs but everybody else's, started to disintegrate as we legalised divorce, homosexuality, all the changes you're referring to under Wilson, the 60s years. Suddenly,
the Roy Jenkins revolution.
Yeah, the Roy Jenkins, but came up and bit them, and they're having now to think again of a different sort of monarchy. We're still in the middle of the search for it. It's not clear. We don't know what will emerge. We hope for the best.
You're all going to have your final thought after this, but I do want to risk one with you, Ingrid, if I may. Widely rumoured as well that Andrew is her favourite of her own children and that Harry is her favourite of the grandchildren. True or false?
I think Harry probably makes her laugh a great deal. And we all love to...
And the dropping phone and stuff like that.
I think she's very, very fond of him, and he's a troubled soul, as he keeps telling us. And Andrew is very much a favourite. He absolutely adores his mother. He wants to spend time with her. It's wonderful to have a child that loves you that much. And he's been very spoiled.
But then you have a choice between public and private. This is the awful thing, that you are in the role of a queen. You can't.
I think that was the title of one of Burnett's books, In Public, in Private.
Yes.
Here's the final one, then. And just off the top of my head, the order, I'm going to start with you.
All right.
Answer my question. Queen Elizabeth II, our greatest queen.
She's devoted to duty. She's stoic. Her legacy will develop and evolve. David's going to say no, so I'm going to say yes.
Ingrid Stewart.
I agree, because she's probably the last person that's really got this selflessness, this devotion to duty. It just doesn't exist anymore because the world has changed so much. You have to think about yourself and you have to push yourself out there. The Queen never had to do that in the way that we do it now, and I think that is such an admirable trait, and I don't think we'll see that again.
They judge you, David Starkey. Are they right?
No. She is by far...
David Starkey.
She is by far our greatest constitutional monarch.
Yes.
But we've only had a fully constitutional monarchy for 100 years, and she has reigned for more than half of it.
Quite extraordinary. And what I've also loved is, and you've all referred to it, is that, don't forget, it's always a double act, whether it's Victoria and Albert or whether it's the Burleys and Elizabeth I or our current monarch and the late, great Philip. I've so enjoyed it. Thank you very, very much indeed. It's been great. I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with these three people, of whom I am very fond and who I greatly respect. Thank you, even more importantly, for watching and listening to our conversation. A final thought from me, if I may. The future of the monarchy, a strange, slightly illogical institution, seems secure this weekend, with a monarch and 3 generations of succession in place. But in a democracy, it rests ultimately with you, and I suspect that is precisely how Her Majesty would want it. From all of us, a very good evening to you. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy for many, with outbreaks of thundery rain possible for some. Let's take a look at the details. In the southwest of England, a band of heavy and possibly thundery rain will affect the parts of North Devon and Somerset, much clearer and drier further west. In the southeast of England, it'll remain rather overcast this evening, and some heavy, possibly thundery showers may affect western areas for a time. In South Wales, there's a thunderstorm warning in force